In 1974, while America was experiencing countless upheavals and skepticism crept in everywhere, a low-budget independent film unexpectedly provided an escape that we all craved. Grizzly Adams was not simply the story of a falsely accused man forced to flee into the deep wilderness. Through the rustic yet astonishingly authentic performance of Dan Haggerty, the film became a soothing balm for the soul. It planted in the viewers a fierce desire for a free, quiet life, alongside the affectionate companionship of the giant bear Ben. The kind heart and peacefulness of that work have truly been etched into the memories of an entire generation. However, behind those beautiful and serene frames on the misty mountains, the behind-the-scenes reality was much harsher and more dramatic than what was shown on screen. What the audience at the time did not know was a production process fraught with lurking dangers, near-death moments when working with wild beasts, and the truths about the real life of James Capen Adams that Hollywood astutely reshaped. Today, we will uncover 12 incredible secrets about Grizzly Adams that have been buried for the past half-century. Join me in turning back time, lifting the curtain of the wilderness to discover what really happened behind the lens. E. The balancing role of the character, Mad Jack. If there were only Dan Haggerty and Ben the Bear, the life and times of Grizzly Adams might have become a series that was too peaceful and slow. But then a character appeared, and accidentally became the secret ingredient that helped the film become much more alive. That character was Mad Jack. Played by Denver Pyle, Mad Jack brought the exact energy that the series needed, which was grumpy, tough, humorous, and full of classic American Western traits. If Grizzly Adams was like a man who found peace in nature, Mad Jack was like an old man who had lived long enough to no longer be too romantic about life. And it was that contrast that made the two characters combine incredibly well on screen. Every time Mad Jack appeared, the atmosphere of the film changed almost instantly. His witty dialogue, familiar grumbling, and old mountain man style created a feeling that was very close to American audiences at that time, especially those who grew up with Western culture and tales of wilderness survival. But the interesting thing is that beneath that irritable exterior, Mad Jack was actually a very kind person. He represented practical life experience, the old-school America survival spirit, and served as the perfect balance to the gentleness of Grizzly Adams. Perhaps that is why, for many longtime fans, Mad Jack was not just a supporting character. He was practically the second soul of the entire series. R. The plot is based on a real person. When mentioning the life and times of Grizzly Adams, many American viewers often remember a very special feeling. Those were peaceful evenings in front of the television screen, as the gentle opening music played, and then the image of a bearded man walking through the mountains and forests with his giant bear, Ben, appeared. Everything in the series brought a sense of warmth and closeness. It was a life completely separated from the loud world. No pressure. No endless hustle. There was only nature, friendship, and very simple life lessons. But what made this story even more fascinating is that Grizzly Adams was not entirely a fictional character. He was inspired by James Capen Adams, a real person who lived in the American West during the 19th century. And the real life of this man was much harsher than the television version. James Capen Adams did not just live among nature. He actually hunted bears, captured bears, and tamed giant grizzly bears during the chaotic California gold rush. That was an era when humans had to fight every single day to survive among wild beasts, harsh weather, and the dangers of the Wild West. Hollywood later turned that image into a version that was much more gentle and healing. But behind the piece of Grizzly, Adams was a historical story that was both intense and strange, which very few viewers ever knew. Sen. The life-changing turning point for Dan Haggerty. Today, many viewers remember Dan Haggerty as an American television icon of the 1970s. With his thick beard, long hair, and rugged look, he was practically born to play Grizzly Adams. But the interesting thing is that before this movie, almost no one in Hollywood thought he would become a star. Before finding fame, Dan Haggerty was just a stuntman and an animal trainer, working behind the scenes. He was not the type of handsome actor according to Hollywood standards at the time. No elegant suits, no glamorous image. In fact, his acting career was quite minor, and few people paid attention to him. But then the life and times of Grizzly Adams came along, and everything changed completely. The film crew needed someone who could live among real nature, work with real bears, and bring a sense of genuine truth in front of the camera. And Dan Haggerty was almost strangely perfect for this role. The special thing was that he barely needed to act. The way he walked, talked, and interacted with animals was completely natural. When he appeared on screen, American audiences did not see a Hollywood actor. They saw a man who truly belonged to the mountains and forests. Perhaps that was the exact reason why Grizzly Adams created a feeling so different from other series of the same era. And it was this very role that turned an unknown man from behind the scenes into an American cultural icon for many decades to come. The reason the show was canceled was not due to low ratings. When a famous television series vanishes from the airwaves, many people often think the simplest reason is a drop in ratings. And for many years, quite a few viewers also believed that the life and times of Grizzly Adams ended because no one was watching it anymore. But the truth is much more interesting. In the late 1970s, Grizzly Adams actually still had an extremely loyal fan base. This was one of the most loved family programs at that time, especially among children and American families living in suburban or rural areas. For many people, seeing Dan Haggerty walk through the mountains and forests with Ben the bear each week had become a familiar and warm feeling. But Hollywood at that time was changing very fast. American television audiences began to be drawn into police series, action shows, and urban dramas that had a faster pace. Meanwhile, Grizzly Adams kept its slow, gentle, and healing style. The very thing that made the show special gradually caused it to be viewed as outdated. In addition, filming out in real nature with wild animals became increasingly expensive and dangerous. And as time went on, the series found it harder to expand the story beyond the familiar formula that made its initial success. Even though it ended after a few seasons, Grizzly Adams still left a very unique mark, like a peaceful memory of America, before modern television became much faster and louder. And woo, the real-life tragedy of Dan Haggerty. For many American viewers, Dan Haggerty will always be tied to the image of Grizzly Adams, a gentle man living in the mountains, loving animals, and always bringing a sense of peace whenever he appeared on screen. It was the kind of character that made people feel the world out there still had something good and simple. But the saddest part sometimes lay behind the camera. Because in complete contrast to the healing atmosphere of the life and times of Grizzly Adams, the real life of Dan Haggerty later on went through many painful events. In 1991, he met with a severe motorcycle accident that left him heavily injured and in a coma for a period of time. That accident greatly affected his health, as well as his life for many years afterward. But the tragedy did not stop there. In 2008, his wife, Samantha Hilburn, also passed away after another motorcycle accident. That loss was said to have a very powerful impact on the spirit of Dan Haggerty during the final chapter of his life. What made many people feel a sense of paradox is that on screen, Grizzly Adams represented peace and healing. But in real life, the man standing behind that character had to face a lot of real sorrow. And perhaps that is what made the image of Dan Haggerty even more special to generations of American viewers, because behind the strong exterior of that mountain man was a life full of very human wounds. Leo. The bear playing Ben was actually a female. For many American viewers who grew up with the life and times of Grizzly Adams, Ben the bear was not just an animal on the screen. Ben was practically the heart of the entire series. Every time this giant bear appeared, it always brought a feeling that was both warm and magical, as if the friendship between humans and nature truly existed somewhere in real life. But there is a backstage truth that many people do not know. Ben was actually a female bear. The real name of this famous bear was Bozo, a very well-trained grizzly bear in Hollywood at that time. Although audiences always thought Ben was a male bear in the show, Bozo was a female in real life, and that fact surprised many fans for years afterward. What is even more interesting is that the relationship between Dan Haggerty and Bozo was barely acting at all. To create a natural closeness on screen, Dan Haggerty spent a massive amount of time living, playing, and working directly with Bozo off the movie set. Because of this, the scenes of them hugging, walking in the woods, or sitting by the campfire looked unbelievably real. But behind that peaceful appearance, there always existed a very real danger. Because no matter how gentle she was, Bozo was still a grizzly bear weighing hundreds of kilograms, one of the most terrifying wild animals in North America. And with just one single moment of losing control, everything could change instantly. C. Harsh filming conditions. One of the reasons why the life and times of Grizzly Adams still carries a very special feeling even when rewatching it today is because the world in the film looks so real. It was not a Hollywood forest built inside a studio. It was not a fake background or modern special effects. The audience can feel the cold in the air, the sound of water flowing through the mountains, and the true wildness of North American nature. And that is because a major part of the film was actually shot out in real nature under conditions that were sometimes extremely harsh. In the 1970s, bringing an entire film crew up to a remote mountain region was not easy like it is today. The filming equipment was very heavy. Moving along the roads was difficult. The weather changed constantly. Not to mention, the crew had to work with real wild animals, especially grizzly bears weighing hundreds of kilograms. For Dan Haggerty, the period of filming Grizzly Adams was almost like a semi-wildlife in reality. He wore thick, heavy clothes for days, filmed near real campfires, and frequently had to stay in the middle of the forest for hours to finish the scenes. Sometimes things became much more dangerous than what the audience saw on the screen. The cold weather exhausted the crew. The slippery terrain caused continuous minor accidents. And with just one careless moment when working with a real bear, everything could get out of hand. But it was also that exact harshness that created a very unique soul for Grizzly Adams, a genuine feeling that many modern series find hard to recreate. By a highly profitable independent film. Today, when talking about the most successful independent films in Hollywood history, many people often think of modern blockbusters with massive marketing campaigns. But back in the 1970s, there was a tiny movie about a man living in the woods with a bear that achieved the near impossible. The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams was made with a budget of only about $165,000. Even by the standards of that era, this was an extremely low number. No A-list stars, no major special effects, no massive promotions. There were only real mountains and forests, a simple log cabin, and Dan Haggerty with his signature beard. In the beginning, almost no one in Hollywood believed the movie would succeed. Many people viewed it as a cheap nature movie, the kind of film that plays and then quickly vanishes from theaters. But something strange happened. American audiences began talking to each other about this small film. They were captivated by the feeling of peace that the movie brought. In an America that was still haunted by the aftermath of the Vietnam War and social crises, Grizzly Adams felt like a place to escape from the modern world. And then the revenue just kept growing. From a movie that was almost completely unknown, Grizzly Adams earned over $30 million at the American box office, a profit margin of nearly 200 times the original investment. This was a crazy achievement that even many major studios at the time found hard to believe. 2. A near-fatal accident caused by a burning beard. When watching the life and times of Grizzly Adams today, many people can often feel a very characteristic piece of 1970s American television. The mountains and forests are quiet. The sound of a campfire crackling in the middle of the night. And Dan Haggerty with his famous beard sitting and telling stories next to Ben the Bear. Everything on the screen looks very relaxing and safe. But behind those warm scenes, there were sometimes situations of real danger. One of the most famous backstage stories of Grizzly Adams is the burning beard incident that almost caused Dan Haggerty to have a severe accident right on the movie set. It sounds like a funny story from old Hollywood, but at that exact moment, everything was actually very dangerous. At the time the series was filmed, Hollywood still made movies in a rather raw way. Very little computer-generated imagery, few safety special effects. Many scenes involving campfires, torches, and survival used real fire out in nature. And with his signature long beard, Dan Haggerty was almost always very close to the flames. Then, during one scene, his beard suddenly caught fire. According to the stories told later on, the fire spread so fast that the entire crew had to rush in to put out the flames right on his face. Fortunately, Dan Haggerty only suffered minor burns. But that accident made everyone realize that behind the peaceful look of Grizzly Adams was a movie set filled with real risks. Sure, mixed critical reviews, but greatly loved by audiences. There are films that are praised by critics, but quickly forgotten by the audience. And then there are films that go in the exact opposite direction. The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams is one such very special example. When the movie debuted in the 1970s, many Hollywood critics were not truly impressed. They believed that the story was too simple. The pacing of the film was slow. The script lacked a major climax. And the acting of Dan Haggerty was too raw compared to the cinematic standards of that era. Some people even viewed Grizzly Adams as just a cheap nature film for families rather than a serious piece of cinema. But the interesting thing is that American audiences felt completely different. During a period when America was exhausted after the Vietnam War and social crises, Grizzly Adams brought a feeling that many people were searching for, which was peace. The quiet atmosphere of the mountains and forests, the evenings by the campfire, and the image of a man living in harmony with nature instead of chasing a chaotic modern world. The audience did not care whether the film was Hollywood enough or not. They believed in Grizzly Adams. They believed in the friendship between him and Ben the bear. And most importantly, they felt the film had a real heart. Perhaps that is the exact thing that made Grizzly Adams last much longer than many critically acclaimed films of the same era. Shri, a perspective-changing experience for the actor playing Nakoma. In the peaceful world of the life and times of Grizzly Adams, the character Nakoma always brought a very distinct feeling. Calm, wise, and almost at one with the surrounding nature. For many American viewers of that era, Nakoma was not just a friend to Grizzly Adams, he was like a symbol of peace and understanding amid the wild mountains. This character was played by Don Shanks, a person who originally came from a background of stunt work and action roles before joining the series. But the interesting thing is that Grizzly Adams did not just change the career of Don Shanks, it also changed the way he looked at the world around him. In many later interviews, Don Shanks shared that the time spent filming in real nature gave him a feeling very different from usual Hollywood. There were no closed studios or familiar artificial lights. Instead, there were mountains, forests, rivers, streams, campfires, and a life almost entirely separated from the city. Gradually, he began to love a lifestyle closer to nature. According to his words, the Grizzly Adams film crew sometimes felt more like a small community living in the mountains than a Hollywood set. The actors had to learn how to adapt to the weather, the terrain, and the real animals around them. Perhaps that exact thing made Nakoma a very special character. He was not built as the exaggerated native warrior stereotype commonly seen back then, but brought a sense of calm, humanity, and deep layers, something that many viewers still remember to this day. Sure. The historical truth of the real life, Grizzly Adams was much harsher than the film. For many American viewers, the life and times of Grizzly Adams always felt like a fairy tale set in the mountains and forests. A gentle man living in a log cabin, making friends with Ben the bear, and staying far away from the chaos of modern society. Everything in the series brought a warm, slow, and almost healing feeling. But the interesting thing is that the real history behind Grizzly Adams was completely different. The person who inspired this character was James Capen Adams, a real historical figure who lived during the California Gold Rush, a phase considered to be one of the wildest and most dangerous eras in the history of the American West. In real life, James Capen Adams was not the type of gentle mountain saint seen on television. He was a true hunter. He was a person who survived in nature by hunting, capturing bears, and performing wild animals in front of the public. His world did not have peaceful afternoons by the campfire, like Hollywood built later on. It was a West full of violence, cold, and danger. The California grizzly bears of that era were not lovely creatures on television. They were massive predatory machines that could kill a human at any moment. And James Capen Adams was attacked by them multiple times in his life, Perhaps it is the exact contrast between real history and the Hollywood version that makes Grizzly Adams so fascinating. Because behind the familiar healing story of American television existed a harsh and very wild reality of the old American West. And those were 12 incredible secrets about Grizzly Adams that have been buried for the past half-century. These bare truths behind the lens do not fade the magic of the film at all. On the contrary, it makes me appreciate the bravery of Dan Haggerty and the entire crew even more. They risked a lot to bring our childhoods a peaceful refuge amidst those turbulent years. What is your most memorable recollection of the kind bearded man and the bear, Ben? Please share it with me down in the comments section. If this journey back in time awakened beautiful memories in you, please press the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next story.